was gonna play with him and she was gonna take the
Okay,
blue thing.
well, what we
So
were
he
talking
took it
about was the
and-
fact
and gave it to no one.
that on Midway Island back in
And
the
then she took it and he grabbed it
late
down.
50s and early
and
60s, they had
He don't
Max
trust her.
liners
Yeah.
that flew from Japan to Hawaii to the United States because they didn't have jets, so they had to stop and fuel in Midway Island. So they had a contingency of Air Force there. They had a contingency of Marine Corps that ran the brig, and then they had a MCB-9 out of Point Magoo in California was doing construction work on the island, and the planes and everything would land there, fuel, and then they would just immediately take off. So nobody ever got to. It was not isolated duty on Midway because they had dependents. The Navy was huge there, and they had a lot of dependents on Midway Island. But none of the other branches had dependents, and I was the only Coast Guard on there. And I think there was probably just maybe a squad or a platoon of Marines that ran the brig. I don't know how many there were. But what would happen was there's nothing for you to do on the island.
Right, and you went to the E Club and you got drunk and you fought every week. But you said something about those guys were on isolated duty on Kure Island and they saw a woman somehow.
Right. Okay, on Kure Island, the island that the Coast Guard had, it was a Loran station because this was before the satellites, and so.
What's a Loran? Is that a weather station?
Yeah,
basically?
it's a Loran. What it is they built these out in these little atolls out in the Pacific, and then what happened was they would fire the Polaris missiles out of these submarines, and then when the missiles would get to a certain trajectory, then the Loran stations would pinpoint what their exact location was and guide them to wherever they were going to blow up. That was how they did it, by triangulation, because we did not have satellites at the time.
Nice.
So these were all ran by the Coast Guard, and most of them had about 20 to 25 men on it. We had 21 on Kure Island. So the island itself was 1.75 miles long and 3/4 mile wide. And like I said, there was 21 of us stationed on there. And the Coast Guard gave us everything we wanted. We had tennis courts and basketball courts, and it was really set up nice because it was isolated duty. Once you went there, you were there for 12 months. You didn't get off that for 12 months. You had to stay there.
Was that for security purposes?
No, that's just the way isolated duty used to be in those days. Now then, that was when the men were made out of wood and the ships were made out of iron, and now then it's the reverse, so they're all wusses now. They can't do 12 months duty, They go to Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever and do their 3 months or 6 months and then come home for. So then anyway, make a long story short, one of the match liners had come from Japan with dependents, and they were headed for the States. It fueled in Midway and then had taken off from Midway. Well, Kure Island was northwest of Midway going up towards Hawaii, and they had a problem with the plane. So what happened was the plane had to make an emergency landing on our island. And so they were concerned about it because it was the old DC-10s is what they were, basically what they were with DC-10s. And so anyway, it set down, it came in and it set down, and of course we knew it was coming, and we had all of our fire equipment and everything out there, and the pickup trucks and foam and everything that we had for all these emergency drills that you do all the time that you never ever have to use, but you have to do them. So the plane comes in and lands, and we get all the people off, and that's where you see that one picture there with in that there. I don't know if you saw the pictures, but we saw all those people walking around with the women and everything else, and the guys standing around. And that's what they were doing. They were all standing around there, and then the Navy flew over some mechanics over to Midway Island, or to Kure Island, and to fix the airplane. And it came over there, and whatever was wrong with it, they fixed it. Well, in the meantime, we were able to get the women, take them inside the barracks there and show them around, because it wasn't very, it was really a small base, and so we didn't have a lot there. But like I said, some of the guys had never seen a woman in almost a whole year, or I was back and forth to Midway, so I saw women all the time. But anyway, they got what they did. They came in with those old Willie Victors, those seaplanes that will land on the ocean, and they had the wheels on them. That's what they normally transported me and supplies over there with. It was one of those things. So they came in with those there, and they started picking the women and their kids up, and then flying them back to Midway Island. And then when they got down to the end there, then they took all of the seats out of the airplane, because they were concerned that it would not be able to take off. The runway was not long enough for it to take off. So they took all the seats and everything out of it and put them in these other planes and flew it out, and then they flew the plane off of there back over to Midway to reload it back up and send it on into Hawaii and everything. So, but it had plenty of room. I was standing by the end, down there, and it had probably another 100 feet or so. I mean, they could have made it easy the way it was going. There was no problem getting it off the ground and everything. So that was the big excitement over there, that the guys got to see some women and got to talk to them and everything, and you know, and they took them in and they fed them, and we had an ice cream making machine there, and we gave the kids ice creams and stuff, and made sandwiches for them and everything. But the isolated duty too is because one of the cooks that we had there, he went crazy. He went nuts because of being out there on isolation for a year. You know, he was just, some people just can't take it, you know.
Right.
But it was fun from the standpoint when you look back at it now. I mean, it's terrible duty to be stationed out there for a year and have nothing. There was nothing but goony birds out there. But the lagoon was so big, and I've got all those pictures with the lagoons that you can see that there. You know, and they give us speedboats that we could do water skiing, and we had scuba gear, and we had all kinds of stuff like that. So we would just go down to the beach and take a big old wash tub down there and fill it up with water, and then take it over and build a big bonfire and set it on it. And while it was heating up the water and everything, we would just go out in the lagoon and get these lobsters out there. They call them longooses because they don't have claws. They just have the tail. They're the Pacific lobster, and they don't have claws. So we'd go out there and get a whole big gunny sack full of those suckers and come back in there, and then when the water was boiling real good and everything, we just dump them in the water in there and let them cook.
Was that fresh water or seawater?
Seawater.
Seawater, yeah.
We didn't have any fresh water. There was no fresh water on there. They had those saline stations where they took the salt water and desalted it and made it into that, so you were constantly, your hair was always kind of gummied up with salt and everything in it, you know, no matter what, you just had salt all over your ears and everything else because there was no, unless it rained. And it did rain, we'd get these rain squalls out there. And so when we would get those, you know, everybody just take off their clothes and get out on a tennis court, you know, and wash down really good with soap and wash your hair and everything, you know, and just rinse off, because it was like a thunderstorm, you know. I mean, it just rained like crazy out there, and it was warm because this is in the Pacific, you know, so it was really warm water. So we did that, and you know, had a lot of fun doing that, and eating, like I said, eating